Alrighty, so Diablo 4's first major expansion, Vessel of Hatred, is here really soon. I've been playing a preview build of the game over this past week, and in that time, I have seen and done just about everything. Played through the campaign, leveled up my character, put my build together, got all my gear and aspects, pumping stuff up, and then running through the end game loop to push that power progression further, which includes doing a handful of new expansion-specific activities, some of which I think is the best the game has had to offer to date. Now, does this address some of Diablo 4's biggest drawbacks, the pain points and complaints that people have had about the game? Well, that's yet to be determined, but I will say there's definitely stuff here about this expansion that I really enjoy, along with some things that are the same complaints, that ground being retreaded. So in today's review, I'm going to give you a overview of Vessel of Hatred. We're going to cover all of the new systems, features, the content types, everything about that. I'm going to share with you a bit of my experience having played the game over this past week, and then wrap it up with my overall thoughts on Diablo 4 after this update goes live. All right, so let's start off by going over all the new stuff coming in Vessel of Hatred. There is a brand new story campaign, of course. This has you following Neyrelle into the jungles of Nahantu. In that process, you will meet some interesting characters, form some new bonds in the form of friendly mercenaries. You'll see some strange things and fight a handful of new creepy enemy family types. Now, I'm not going to spoil any of the specific story details or boss encounters for those of you who are interested in experiencing those yourself. It was good from what I saw, but not much to tell and talk about here. I am happy, however, to talk about the brand new region, Nahantu. This was very cool. First of all, I absolutely adore this general setting in most fantasy games, and I feel like Blizzard has executed it well here in what they've delivered of a sprawling, deep, dark jungle with towering trees covering the floor in shadows. There's tons of lush, oversized plant life all around, a lot of vertical space to explore here. It's not just flat terrain. You're actually climbing up into the canopies or deep down into cavernous spaces below and exploring all sorts of ancient ruins and temples. The zone is just really well done. I thoroughly enjoyed exploring and checking out these new areas. Overall, it looks like Nahantu is slightly larger than any of the zones we saw in the base game. It consists of 6 separate areas. These are mostly jungle with a couple of rocky canyon spots too. And then all throughout this is everything that you expect from a Diablo 4 zone. You've got points of interest that are tied to the main and side story quest. There are tons of public events. There are strongholds and Legion events. I counted, I believe, 20 additional dungeons in this region, all of which, by the way, do reward aspects for the brand new class. And then all of the usual Tree of Whisper content quests are in here, like kill groups of enemies, clear some dungeons, go into cellars, find a corpse, complete the rituals, all that stuff. There's also a new altar type called Tenet of Akarat. These require you to basically uncover some nearby hidden statues, and then it reveals the altar. You collect them, you get stuff, but it's not quite the same. You don't get those bonus permanent stats to your character. Oh, and I will add, the music is great in the entire region. It felt like reminiscent of Diablo 2, but with a bit of a twist. It caught my attention enough for me to want to mention it here, so that's a pretty good sign. All right, next up we have got the new class, Spiritborn. This is an agile and mobile warrior. They use glaives, quarterstaffs, and polearms, and all of their abilities and attacks are infused with one of 4 spirit guardians. So each of the guardians basically have their own theming and specialty. Eagle skills are all about precision, impact, and quickly moving around the battlefield. Centipede skills focus on crowd control while also dealing poison damage. Jaguar skills are quick, hard-hitting, and infused with fire. And then you've got the Gorilla skills, which are mostly tanky with defensive boost and a bit of CC as well. So as you move through the trees, you can pick the abilities from any of the 4 spirit types. It's just like any other class. You can mix and match what you want here. And Blizzard has said in designing the Spiritborn that their goal with the class was for you to have the speed and agility of the rogue while being physically brutal like the barbarian, layered with these fantastical effects similar to that of the sorcerer. And then obviously with the animal infusion here, there's a little bit of druid as well. It's a little bit of everything basically. I only briefly played the new class in my time with the expansion. I just like the barbarian too much, so I stuck with that, leveling up my favorite whirlwind dust devil build. But Spiritborn seems pretty cool, and I will likely play more of the class at some point in the future. All right, so next up we have got mercenaries, and these are actually pretty darn cool. Now, normally when it comes to AI companions, I'm just a bit uncaring. Like, yeah, wow, someone follows me around and attacks enemies to help out whenever, whatever. But I gotta say, the way that they've implemented mercs here with their passive bonuses and the reinforcement system, it's actually quite helpful and can really enhance your build depending on the things that you choose. So there are 4 mercenaries in the game. They boil down to an archer, a berserker, a tank, and a mage. And they do follow you around and they attack enemies. They've got abilities that they will cast, and the ones that they have just depend on what you select from their skill tree, which is a little bit more involved than D3, but not much. And so yeah, that is helpful. Them following you around and attacking, that's cool. But it's the perks and the reinforcement where the utility and the interesting stuff comes in. So whatever mercenary you hire to follow you around directly, they come with a passive perk with some pretty big benefits. So let's start off with Subo, the archer. Their perk called Seeker has a 20-second cooldown for the active effect, but the passive effect has Subo revealing all enemies and materials in an area. This was super helpful, especially as I spent a lot of my playtime desperately searching around for iron. The fact that he would mark on my map, the mini map and the map when you pull it up, everything in a wide vicinity, all of the enemies and all of the resource nodes. That's really cool for farming. But then he also has this active ability where he will call out and mark an enemy target for 10 seconds. And then if you kill that target, it restores 50% of your max resource and reduces the Seeker cooldown from 20 seconds down to 10 seconds. Really nice. Then there's Varyana, the berserker. Her perk Massacre makes it so that you and Varyana will stack a massacre bonus together on kills. Then reaching certain stack thresholds grants you movement speed. So at 10 Massacre, you get 5% movement speed. At 25, it's 10%. At 50, 15%. And reaching 100 Massacre gives you a 20% increased move speed. Now, this resets after 7 seconds of not killing an enemy, but for the most part, I would have that 20% extra move speed up 100% of the time if I was doing any sort of activity, regularly engaging with enemies. That was really nice. And then there's Rahir, the tank. His perk Valiance has got a 30-second cooldown. And what it does is when you would be damaged for at least 15% of your current life at one time, Rahir comes to your aid to negate all of that damage, then knocks down close enemies for 2 seconds and grants you unstoppable for half a second. And then there's Alkin, who is like a mage. His perk Blasphemous Fate occasionally transforms into a demon form for 22 seconds. This gives him new abilities to attack with, but it also curses you, but that curse comes with some benefits. So one of them, Curse of Darkness, will make you, but also all nearby enemies vulnerable. And the second one, Curse of Flames, makes it so that your direct damage will burn enemies for 4,000 damage over 3 seconds, but at the same time, you lose 10% of your max resource per second. And honestly, any of these passives, as well as the active abilities that include in this perk by having that active follower, these are really good. And I basically found myself just swapping out between the mercs based on the content that I was doing and what I was wanting. So if I was farming resources, I would hire Subo so that I could see all of the resource nodes in addition to the enemies all around me on my map. If I was speed farming, well, then I had 2 choices. I could do Varnya, which was great for the extra speed boost of the 20% move speed, or I could pick Aldkin because essentially he boosts your damage either by applying vulnerability to enemies around you or by applying burning whenever you do direct damage. If I was pushing into harder content and needed more defenses, well, then I would hire Rahir because he will literally save you anytime you take a big hit once every 30 seconds, negating all the damage. That's really, really great. But beyond those active ones that you have, like the active mercenary that you're hiring, there's also the reinforcement system. So every single merc has it's 6 different abilities in their skill tree, and you can pick any one of those abilities to be cast when you use a certain skill of your own or when a certain condition is met. And those conditions are if you are crowd controlled, if you become injured, or if you cast a skill in combat. This essentially gives you additional bonuses for any of your skills. So some examples. For Varnya, I would select her Bloodthirst ability, which gives me 10% attack speed for 7 seconds. I had her cast that whenever I cast my Whirlwind. Or for Rahir, he has a Bastion ability where he creates a barrier. I think this is like a 30-second cooldown. He creates a barrier and that redirects 90% damage. So I had him cast that whenever I reached an injured state. Or for Alkin, he has an ability where he would chain all enemies together and I would attach that and have him cast that whenever I did one of my shouts when I knew I was going to be around enemies that I wanted grouped up. Or Subo has like a cover fire where he shoots a volley of arrows that slows enemies and I had him cast this whenever whenever I did a whirlwind. So between their passive perks for the one mercenary that you have following you directly, and then the reinforce system where you select a second one, there's just so many useful, interesting combinations here. But yes, the TLDR is they do way more than just follow you around attacking enemies, which is what I assumed. It's just a lot to tinker with, and it mixes things up a bit. I really, really liked it. So the first mercenary that you unlock as you play through the campaign is Rahir. Once you get him, you unlock the mercenary den, and at that point you can accept any of the other mercenary quests for the other three. And this is pretty much just like side quest chains where you do some things to help them out, and then the mercenary will join you in the den. And then from there on out, you can recruit them, either choosing to have them be your main or have them be your reinforcement mercenaries, swapping them out whenever. But then on top of that, inside of that den area, there's also this new bartering system. So whatever two mercs you have equipped as your main and your reinforcement one, they will gain experience and level up as you play with them. So they've got this rapport reputation system, and it comes with a bunch of rewards. You get items, gear, and resources as you progress, but there's also this brand new special currency. And with this currency, you can exclusively in the mercenary den spend it at a vendor named Faye Ira, and she carries a stock of weapons, armor, jewelry, aspects, as well as various helpful caches. Honestly, this is really good. You can get these ancestral gear pieces with multiple greater affixes. In fact, I found myself a one-handed sword with 3 greater affixes on it, GG. And you get to see exactly what it is before you spend the currency on it. It honestly felt like a better version of Obel's gambling, frankly. Beyond the gear, you can roll on aspects as well, but honestly, the biggest thing for me was the salvage material resource caches. That's what I was mostly after, as I spent like the back half of my entire playtime for this review desperately in need of upgrade materials. Yeah, the bartering system, really nice, super helpful, nice new addition to the game. Now let's move on to the Dark Citadel. This is one of the 2 new content activity types that are coming in Vessel of Hatred. The other one, called the Undercity, we'll get to in a moment. But the Citadel, this is a large, elaborate dungeon that requires, and I mean requires, multiple players to clear. You cannot do this solo. There are mechanics in the dungeon that prevent you from being able to progress unless a second player is there. Now, the first thing I'll say about the Citadel is this is actually probably one of my favorite activities in all of Diablo 4. I think they did a stellar job of finally adding a new type of content that feels different from a gameplay perspective. Like, yes, I am still using my same build. I'm zooming through these massive groups of enemies with attacks that are clearing the whole screen, but then there are parts of the dungeon that force you to slow down or just engage in activities other than blitzing through the room doing spin to win, you know what I mean? Half of the fun of something like this is figuring out yourself, so I will not spoil exactly what you do in every encounter and puzzle, but I would like to give you the basic idea of the sort of things you'll come across that have helped deliver on this different feeling that I'm talking about. So as you travel through the dungeon's various wings, and yes, they've got wings like MMO style raids are sometimes broken into with these different themed sections. In the process of clearing groups of enemies, you're gonna come across a variety of obstacles. You will see matching puzzles where you have to gather and deliver the proper symbol into a location. There will be pressure plates that open gates and lift barriers that require 2 players in order to get past them. There are teleport portals that you have to charge and then stand on them to activate. There are multiple branching pathways that need to be cleared simultaneously. So one person or a pair, if you're playing in a group of 4, you can do 2 or 4. So one person or a group goes left, and then the other person or a group goes to the right. And then you will have objectives to clear, as well as an impending doom ticker, which is like a fail state timer that if you don't complete the objective before the end, you instant die. And you have to clear these 2 branching paths at the same time. And in a lot of sections where you are split up, you actually can't progress through one part until your partner clears their objective on their side, which again is part of the forced teamwork that makes these group dungeons instead of solo dungeons. And then of course, as you probably expect, there are difficult boss fights all throughout the Citadel, a whole range of different attack types, projectiles, and damage pools, just things you have to avoid so you don't die. They're gonna have multiple phases where some changes occur in the encounter, but then they've also implemented some new interesting stuff, like having to reflect projectiles back towards a boss, or having your group split up in the middle of a boss fight, going in different parts of the encounter, sometimes in entirely separate areas, or doing that rune matching that you use to solve some puzzles, having to do that in the middle of also fighting a boss with a bunch of ads all around you. And there will be moments where you'll have to do any number of these things in a very certain particular order. So as you can see, many sections of the Citadel have you engaging in more than just dealing and avoiding damage, which I feel like a majority of the rest of Diablo 4 basically boils boils down to that. Most of the end game loop, no matter what it is I'm doing, is me holding down right click and occasionally hitting a few other buttons so I don't die or so that I can get a damage boost. But the Dark Citadel, it feels different with their implementation of these other varied activities, and I really like it. I just had a blast. This is great content, and I hope they add more like this. Not just like more group dungeons, but more variety of content to break up the action besides just spinning to win through all of the other forms of content, right? The Dark Citadel has this central hub. It's located right at the dungeon's entrance, and it has the typical assortment of crafting stations, repair stations, things for you to customize and change your gear. But there's also a unique vendor called Zyanya who takes the Citadel coins in exchange for various new buff scrolls, potions, and incense. There's gear, crafting, and gem caches that you can cash in for, as well as cosmetic weapon skins for you to acquire. All right, so the second new content type in Vessel of Hatred is called the Undercity, although this one not as interesting to me as the Citadel. Like most activities, it has its own unique small twist, but it's also fundamentally the same basic gameplay experience. So this is simply a multi-leveled dungeon where you go in, you clear hordes of enemies. You're moving through these 3 separate floors and then taking a portal to a boss fight where you collect loot at the end. But there are a few twists. For one, there is a timer that can be extended by killing enemies marked with an hourglass. If the timer reaches 0, you fail your run, so you want to kill these enemies to extend that timer to keep progressing. Depending on how tough the enemies are, more time will get added to that countdown timer. The second interesting thing is that it's got this 4-tiered progression bar where killing enemies fills the bar, and you get these big boosts when you go to these marked altars scattered around each floor. You want to fill this up to the 4th tier to get the highest amount of loot at the very end. And then the third thing, and this is the really big one, is that the Undercity provides a new way to target farm for certain gear. So before you start an Undercity run, you can offer what is called a tribute. There are multiple types of tributes, and that's going to determine the reward type that you get at the very end. So for example, the Harmony tribute will reward you runes. Refinement is going to give you masterwork materials, and then Titans will give you boss summon materials. So offering a tribute before you start a run guarantees that you will get some of these rewards upon its completion. But then also it comes with the drawback of having a shorter starting time, getting less bonus every time you kill one of those hourglass enemies, and you'll also have fewer potions drop on the run. However, after the tribute, there's also this second layer of additional target farming through the bargains. So once you insert a tribute, you can then also offer a bargain that further tailors your rewards. This lets you exchange certain materials for things like making it so that any legendary armor that drops will always possess at least 1+ skill rank for one of your class's skills, or making it so that you only see uniques that are specific for your class, or so that you've got legendary equipment that when legendary equipment drops, it's only going to have an aspect of a certain category. So if you only want offensive aspects, this will make it so that any legendary equipment drops only drop with offensive aspects. So as you can probably see, tributes and bargains are going to be a great way for you to farm for very specific things that you might need for your character. It's a nice new addition. Undercity is available as soon as level 15, by the way, so you can actually do this farming while you are also leveling up your character. Next, we got rune words. It's a pretty straightforward system. You basically match this top rune called a ritual with a bottom rune called an invocation, and then place them into any gear piece that has 2 sockets available. This lets you pick from a variety of builders of the rune specific resource, which is called offering, that is then spent on your bottom rune's special ability. So in any piece of gear that has 2 sockets, your top rune is going to be how you build your offering, that resource, and then the bottom rune is what you spend that offering on and what effect triggers. So for example, some top runes include building up offering when you do things like crowd control enemies in a certain way, when you cast evade, when you drink a potion, or when you cast your ultimate. This will build up your offering, and then depending on the rune, it's going to build a different amount of offering when you meet that requirement. Then that bottom rune has some ability that triggers after you reach a threshold of offering, after you build the resource up to a certain point. The stronger runes typically cost more offering in order to activate. So for example, one of the strongest runes I've found costs 900 offering, and it makes it so that your next skill cast will crit and overpower. Then there are a bunch of runes that will give you access to other class skills like a Bulwark of the Druid or a Warcry of the Barbarian, and it doesn't matter what class you play, you can get a rune to cast these spells. You can get a Sork's Teleport, for example. There's also a bunch of utility spenders like gaining life, reducing cooldowns, summoning pets, or getting primary resource back. It's a pretty cool system. Not really much to say about it though. There's a few rune combos that I used. It didn't like blow my mind or anything, but clearly there's some potential skill and mixing and matching here. All right, so those are all like the big bullet point features of the expansion. I do also want to quickly talk about some of the patch 2.0 changes. These aren't specific to Vessel of Hatred, meaning that you're going to have access to them even if you don't buy the expansion. But since they launch in tandem with the expansion, I think they're worth mentioning. So there were level adjustments. The level 100 character cap was cut in half to 50, and then in the expansion, we level from 50 to 60. This comes with 10 extra skill points to use over what we had in the base game. After 60, you're gaining Paragon points. And then also with the level cap, they did a stat squish, just lowering numbers across the board. There was changes to the difficulty system, so the previous world tiers and the accompanying capstone dungeons, that's been scrapped. It's been replaced with a new difficulty progression. You start with normal. As you play, you unlock hard, expert, and penitent, and then after that, there are the torment levels 1 through 4, which you unlock those by progressing through the pit. Paragon system got a revamp, changes to how we level glyphs. Now instead of feeding experience into them, they have a % chance to upgrade. Then each class also got 1 additional Paragon board, but now we can only have 5 boards maximum. There were item adjustments, like ancestral items now start dropping in Torment 1. They will always have a greater affix and will always be the new max item level of 800. Sacred items are no longer in the game, and then there's been a bunch of new items, new mythics, uniques, and legendary aspects added. And then new skills, specifically there's 1 new active skill as well as 5 new passives added for every single class. Bunch of quality of life improvements. They added a party finder so you can search for players for any activity. You can now favorite any town waypoint so that you always go there when you hit T for portal. There's a separate additional dungeon key and socketable inventory tabs. They've given us 1 extra stash tab. There's the wardrobe cosmetics that can now be accessed from anywhere and not just in towns. And then they've added pets just like Diablo 3. These will automatically follow you and pick up currency, materials, and resources that drop basically everything that isn't weapons or gear. Now we also have Season of Hatred Rising. That is the other thing we saw in the review. This comes with its own little side story quest line. There's a reputation system with a reward track, but there was some new content as well in these world event mini dungeons. So periodically what's going to happen is these realm walkers appear somewhere on the map, and they are like these big lumbering creatures with a portal on top of their head. They kind of stomp around for a few minutes, summoning groups of enemies. You have to kill the enemies they summon. This fills up a bar, which makes the realm walker angry. When he's mad enough, he starts attacking you. You have to deal with him as well as more summoned enemies. When you kill him, it opens up a portal. You then take this portal into what is called the Seething Realm, where you go through what is sort of a mini dungeon, clearing through some enemies. At the end of the first section, you come across this wellspring, and then here you get to select what reward you want from the end. So you pick from one of these 3 opals. It's a new type of consumable that grants you buffs that reward some sort of a bonus drop from any enemies, either dropping extra gold, extra equipment, or extra materials when you kill any enemies. It's just a new buff type in addition to potions and incense. So you pick one and then you step through the wellspring. This puts you into the 2nd level of the dungeon. And then once you get to the end of the wellspring level, there's a few waves of enemies you have to fight. You kill them, and then you finally get a bunch of loot, item drops in addition to the opals of the choice that you picked prior. And that pretty much does it for covering like all of the new stuff that's coming in Vessel of Hatred with patch 2.0, as well as in the new season. So how am I feeling about Diablo 4? Well, one thing is for certain, they have definitely continued to improve and add upon one of the game's bigger criticisms that we had at release, which was the lack of endgame variety. With this expansion and the new season, the list of endgame activities in Diablo 4 has continued to grow, adding on to what was already added over the course of this past year. So if you recall, when Diablo 4 came out, the endgame consisted of running nightmare dungeons, doing the Hell Tides, going through the Whispers, you got the world bosses, and then finally there was Lilith, who sort of acted as a pinnacle challenge for you to test your build, i.e. did you pick the right class? We are still doing all of the stuff that was here at release, but then there's also some of the new stuff that's coming over the past year and the new stuff with the expansion in the season. You now have the Uber Boss summons, which you go to farm unique gear used for specific builds. You have the Pit, which is Diablo 4's version of Greater Rifts. This is where you're going to be going for upgrading your glyphs as well as unlocking the new Torment difficulty tiers. You have the Infernal Hordes, which I think that came with last season. I'm not sure because I didn't play, but this is a place you can go to farm experience as well as materials. There is the brand new Undercity, which as we covered is all about target farming specific things. There's the Citadel, which is just plainly interesting content. It also has raid specific items and consumables for you to go after. And then there are the Realm Walkers added in this recent Season of Hatred, which have item drops, but also that new consumable opal buffs, which you're probably going to want as well. This is clearly a much longer list with a variety of things to do after you play through the campaign than what we had at release. I mean, as expected, I guess, being a live service game, Blizzard has supported Diablo 4, and now it has way more more content and is far more fleshed out than it was last year when it first came out. Not really surprising, and hey, guess what? They'll continue to support it, and a year from now, it's gonna have even more new content and stuff for you to engage with. So what are my overall impressions having spent the past week playing this expansion? I mean, generally, I enjoy playing Diablo 4. I had a good time. On the list of likes include the gameplay. It's as fun, moment to moment, feels as good as ever. It's always been good. I've always enjoyed playing Diablo 4. Every time I sit back down to jump into the game again, which I've done a couple of times since release now, it's immediately enjoyable. Like, Blizzard definitely crafted a good gameplay feel. That has not changed. Also, as just mentioned, there is nearly twice the variety of endgame activities. Nightmare Dungeons, Helltides, Whispers, World Bosses, Uber Bosses, the Pit, Infernal Hordes, the Undercity, the Citadel, and now the Realm Walkers. There is a lot to do here, and each activity has its own purpose and its own rewards, its own motivation for you to go and do it. The endgame variety is in a much better spot now than it was when it first came out, and especially the Citadel. I just want to reiterate, I love this. It is what I feel is really the first piece of content with a challenge outside of a gear check, outside of do you do enough damage and do you have enough survivability. Most every other thing that I do in D4 boils down to just doing that. Now, parts of the Citadel are still rolling through enemies, but they break that up with activities that require some thinking and figuring out at least the first time you go through it, and I loved it. I wish this game had way more of it, but I'm glad they've added it just in general. But it's not all roses, and there are some dislikes. First, oh my god, let me tell you about iron chunks and leather. Ugh, God. These two base level resources are needed for pretty much every element of enhancing your gear, of imprinting aspects, of tempering, of the masterwork upgrades. Outside of like the Paragon system and leveling up your glyphs, everything that makes you and your build stronger requires these two basic resources, and there's not nearly enough of it anywhere. I was constantly starving for both iron and leather. I could not get enough. Y'all got any more of that iron? Like, literally, I just kept not being able to equip new gear drop upgrades. I would get gear drops, I would get a piece of gear that had like 3 greater affixes on it, and I couldn't even equip it because doing so would mean losing an important aspect or the tempering that I had on my prior piece of gear, which you might say, hey, just re-temper and put the new aspect back on, but I couldn't afford it because I was always out of iron and leather. It is a massive bottleneck, and it was really super annoying. And to do anything, I had to constantly farm iron and leather instead of like doing any of the other activities that I wanted to do. I focused on, that was the biggest bottleneck, was my iron and my leather. As an example, I would farm Helltides for like an hour the whole time it was up, and this would give me roughly enough iron to imprint one aspect onto my weapon. My weapons, the two-handed weapons, it was like 400 to 500 iron in order to put an aspect on it. Or I could try re-rolling my tempers, which you have to do quite a bit until you get what you want, and I could probably have enough iron to do like reroll tempers maybe 4 or 5 times. But if I got 4 bad rolls, which happened frequently, that was it. I spent an hour farming iron. I went to roll my tempers. All 4 of them were not what I wanted. Back into the Helltides, bro. Just hated it. They need to fix this iron and leather bottleneck. And then something that I alluded to earlier, the fact that for the most part, it feels like I'm doing the exact same thing everywhere I go. Like, it doesn't matter if I'm running the Pit, if I'm doing Nightmare Dungeons, if I'm in Helltides or Infernal Hordes, even if I'm in the new Undercity, it's all pretty much the same. I am holding down right click, occasionally pressing another button to either boost my damage or my defenses. All of these different activities might as well be the same activity. Now, this is largely like an ARPG thing, I guess, right? But with the release of the Citadel, it really highlighted for me the fact that there can be other ways to present gameplay in an ARPG. Similarly, we saw a different amount of variety of activity types in a game like Lost Ark, different ways to just break up the action. So I hope this is something they can lean more into in the future, this design philosophy, and less of just adding these different activities where I am functionally doing the exact same screen clearing method 100% of the time. And while I have had a good time playing, I also once again hit that wall of not seeing the point of grinding any further to push that harder difficulty. It's great the first few times through, as you're leveling up, as you're unlocking the power progression, you're getting all your skills, you're leveling up your Paragon board, you're leveling up your glyphs, and that's all fun like the first time through. But at this point now, after playing for this past week, like, I've seen all the content for the most part. I haven't done the highest difficulty, but I kind of don't see the point because pushing up the difficulty tier, it just makes things 100x harder. Enemies deal 100x more damage and they have 100x more health. So like, sure, I could go grind iron chunks for the next 50 hours to fine tune my gear with the tempers, with the masterworking, improving my runes. Maybe I look for some upgraded aspects, but then I do that grinding to be doing the exact same content again. And I know this too is just a part of ARPGs, but it is also that same point where I tend to fall off. Like, I have fun running through everything the first few times and going through those initial and mid-tier stages of the power progression, but then when I hit that wall of difficulty scaling where it's the exact same activity but just 100x harder, and I'm faced with a 100-hour grind in order to get that content to just feel like the current content that I'm already doing. Like, why am I going to grind for 100 hours so I can do Torment 4 the way it feels in Torment 3? Like, there's, at that point my brain goes, why are you doing this? Stop, get some help. And so I do. That's when I stop. Now, to be fair, this isn't Diablo 4 specific. Also, I don't have a solution here, but frankly, I don't really think I need one. I'm sort of just sharing that point of my experience with the genre and many other loot progression genres where I inevitably lose the desire to keep grinding when there isn't new content to see, but it's just more of the same content with a 100-hour grind in between. And then that 100-hour grind just gets that next tier of difficulty to feel like the current tier of difficulty, but I'm not seeing anything new. That's when I go, yeah, I'm good. It's been fun. I'll see you later. Even with those complaints in mind, those are kind of broad speaking, except for the Iron Chunk thing. Diablo 4 specifically needs to fix that. Yeah, hey, I played D4 and I had a fun time over this past week. I spent well over 50 hours with the expansion up until this point, and had it not been the review build and the actual launch, I would have kept on playing. Like, I could see myself spending maybe upwards of 100 hours with the expansion. I do think they're moving in a great direction. They have made a lot of improvements over the past year, and I'm really interested to see how much more the game evolves and grows in the coming year. So yes, I've had a fun time with the expansion. I'm going to play a bit more at official release. I will probably play back up until that point, somewhere between tier 3 and 4, where my brain goes, you're just grinding to do the same content. You're grinding to do the same content. You're grinding to do the same content. Were it grinding to do new and different content, that would be one thing, but that's not what we're presented with. So there you go. That's what I will do at release. That's what I did this past week. It's fine. I'll have fun in that 50 to 100 hour window. As for whether or not Vessel of Hatred is worth $40, well, that is up to you. And hopefully this video gave you enough information to be able to make that decision for yourself. That is all for today. Thank you as always for watching. Hope you enjoyed. See you next time.